Hello to everyone. We're delighted to hold this webinar today, 9 o'clock in the morning in the UK, and very different times, of course, from around the world. So a very warm welcome to you all. I'd like to start off just very briefly by explaining the Elders Council. And today, of course, we have the title of this event today is Celebrating Your Journey. And we know that all of you have had a very challenging time during setting up your organizations, doing your work, your lives in general. And so we recognize those challenges. And when we began, Mel Young, Chris Underhill and I thought of the Elders Council, we did that because we know that the journey through founding and running a social enterprise, and then to moving through that organization out to the other side and wondering what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how your organization will survive. There are some very practical and emotional and psychological challenges in all of that, in the work and then the moving on. And we know that amongst this community, there's a huge amount of wisdom to be shared, not just with each other, but with youngers and with older elders. And we also wanted to find a place where people can gather, where people understand that journey that you've had and celebrate it and look at the challenges that you've had and learn from everyone's journey. We're working on looking at gathering that wisdom into a wisdom bank, and we know that you will all contribute to that. With that, I'd like to just say this session is going to be recorded and will be shared again with your permission. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Chris Underhill to introduce our two wonderful guests.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and let me join her in welcoming everybody. It's lovely to see so many people coming on to the session today to hear and be in discussion with our two wonderful speakers. Just very briefly to introduce them before we invite the first speaker to make her contribution. I'm talking about Dr. Nani Carandang, who right now is a mindfulness practitioner and teacher, having trained under a well-known teacher of mindfulness. She, at the moment, is in her nature sanctuary and is, of course, a proud mother and grandmother. But that's not really the whole story. That's to begin at the end, as it were. She is, in fact, a person who is so well known to us in the field of psychology, and she's the founder of the Mindfulness, Love and Compassion Institute for Psychosocial Services, MLAC Institute, as we would call it. She introduced into the Philippines quite a number of psychosocial issues, but particularly, and perhaps importantly, she introduced and founded the Philippine Association for Child and Play Therapy, sometimes known as PhilPlay. In her 4 decades of practice and academic work, she has authored 13 books. She's been president of the Psychological Association of the Philippines, PAP, editor at the Philippine Journal of Psychology, chair of the psychology department, and in fact has been a great leader in the field of psychology in the Philippines, having finally been honored in a number of different ways with Outstanding Professional for Psychology by the Philippine Regulatory Commission, and many other awards as well. So, Nani, we are really so pleased that you're joining us, and I will just introduce our second speaker, and then we'll come to you to hear you. Our second speaker is Nani Zulminarni. She is an extremely important person in the whole question of the empowerment of women for poverty eradication and overcoming discrimination, using different forms of entry point, including social, economic, and political empowerment. Having graduated originally from the agricultural world, she has become a gender and development specialist, a popular educator, feminist, and activist. And her passion is for community organizing and the economic and political empowerment of grassroots women. She's had a number of extremely important posts, but I think I wanted to focus at this moment on the founding of PEKKA, the Women-Headed Family Empowerment Organization, an organization that supports over 3,000 community-based organizations of poor rural widows, abandoned, divorced, and single women in more than 1,600 villages across 34 provinces in Indonesia. Having led PEKKA in so many different ways, she has now become its chair. But at some point in this whole process of being a social entrepreneur, Nani then made an important decision and joined Ashoka. And in her joining Ashoka, she has then become the responsible for the Southeast Asia region and is now helping Ashoka to build Everyone a Changemaker movement, EACH as we call it in Southeast Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to have all of you with us today, and in particular, it's marvelous to have you on this particular session as we begin to bring the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs to Central and Southeast Asia with the able support of Hani and Nani. So Hani, we'd love to come to you and invite you to give us some of your thoughts. Where are you today? And how are you thinking as you look back over your 4+ decades of experience and as you begin to think about the future? Over to you, Hani.
Okay, thank you. First of all,
Great
Chris,
pleasure. Yeah, huge pleasure.
Andrea, Mel, Caitlin, and Hannah also for being, and hello, glad to meet you, Nani. Okay, good morning and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are whatever part of the world you are in. Okay, this is 15 minutes, so I'm gonna go through it quite quickly. My journey's been 50 years and 52 years, but I'll say it in 15 minutes, okay? So first of all, thank you for calling me a social entrepreneur. I never thought I was a social entrepreneur until I saw that means it's a person who establishes an enterprise with the aim of effecting social change and not for profit. Then I qualify. Thank you. And I'm so excited to share with you my journey. Right now, as you were asking, Chris, I am actually transitioning. Okay, I am now starting the process of leaving MLAC, the running of MLAC Institute for Psychosocial Services to our executive director. She was here earlier, Hannah Murillo, who is also a good friend of Chris. And I think she was the one who connected Chris and myself, right? Okay, so as we say, let's start from the beginning, start from where we are, and which is now. Briefly, MLAC, just to say what MLAC briefly is, Mindfulness, Love, and Compassion. Mindfulness, Love, and Compassion Institute. Okay, it's a team of just 12 highly trained psychologists, which I formed in 2010. Our vision is to bring the science of psychology into the community and the families where they can be more used rather than in the academe where I come from, and especially the well-being of communities, families, especially those who are marginalized and traumatized. And that's what we've been doing. So going to disaster areas, we're going to families with abuse, connecting with government and other agencies that are working in the same area, well-being of children and families. Okay, so I started in the academe. I was in the academe for like 36 to 40 years, and in the academe I was I think it was mentioned, I was a chair of the department and a professor, from instructor to professor down up the ranks. And we were having exciting discussions with the academe. I was teaching and mentoring in the sense of not just teaching skills, but teaching and mentoring the person, the person of the psychologist, who is the person of the psychologist, for focusing on the person of the psychologist. That is my brand. So started in the academe, but then after a while, it was fun and it was just enjoyable. But then I thought, what are we doing here? We have psychology, beautiful theories, etc. But who are the people who are using them? Why are we not communicating them to the people who could actually use them in their daily lives, the people in the communities, the families, and so on. So I started by stepping out of the academe, still professor, but doing on the side the first clinical practice that was done in the Philippines. So I got a friend of mine who's an art educator. We rented a very small room and started the practice. No fanfare, no license, nothing, just practice. So anyway, it was that way before. So the practice started to grow, and to make the long story short, because I want to do a short story of my long journey. So to make it short, after about 10 years and more, I thought, wait a minute, these are so important things such meaningful things that I've found about the family, that I've observed, that I've dealt with, digging the guts of the culture, digging into the innards of the family. And I think I should share this. So to the people who really are families and who can use it. So I wrote the book, my first book, book 1, called Filipino Children Under Stress, Family Dynamics and Therapy, in 1987. It was a finalist for the best book category in the Catholic Mass Media Award. It was reprinted for 6 years, and very exciting now. I'd like to invite you, September 2, MLAC's very special event called Parenting Academy. The book that was written in 1987 will now be relaunched as a classic, because it is a kind of a manual on how to deal with families. And I'm so happy and proud that LaSalle University is launching the book, relaunching it, and we're gonna send you the invites. Okay, because this is one of the most important events we have in the year for the MLAC Institute, Parenting Academy. Okay, so after that, I went to clinical practice. Another thing happened, and always responding to the social issues. Autism became kind of a word that was coming in, and people were asking, what is autism? People didn't know about it, and so on. So I formed a team again. The team, because I've been mentoring clinical psychologists, masteral and doctoral students for about 36 years, and I have a team of generations of them. So that generation, I formed a team, and having some training in autism, and I did the team did a lot of practice on having autistic children and their families and talking to their parents. And so it became a big thing, and therefore so many people came to know what autism was. At the time, it was not ASD, but just autism. And so we talked to the parents. I gave my clinic to the parents so they could talk to each other, could come together, be a very community, and it became a community. So the parents of my first successful case formed the Autistic Society of the Philippines. And I was very happy that there was a formal organization there, and now it's spreading in the whole Philippines. And before I left that, I wrote my second book, which is entitled Making Connections, a group therapy program for autistic children and their families, which is now being used, has been used to deal with the autistic. It has the methods, technology, innovative techniques, definitions, etc. So that's my book too. Okay, next, from the clinic, I went to the communities. So UNICEF in 1990 went to the university, Ateneo University, where I was chair of the psychology department, and asked me to do the psychosocial intervention for disaster survivors, the first in the Philippines using psychology. Because what was usually done is you go to the disaster area, they give food and all the basic physical needs, but what we were doing was more of the psychological intervention, the trauma, the recovery, etc. It was the first. And so we went there. We went to a very far-flung area. It was the most devastating earthquake in the Philippines, 1990. So we went to the far-flung area, no electricity, the toilet was a hole in the ground, but I was young, so I could do it with my team. I formed a team again, always forming a team. So we went there, stayed there for a week, and then went back to see how they were doing. We did innovative techniques like therapeutic metaphors, rituals, etc., and so on. And so that was what happened. And then people now started doing it. And I wrote a book 3, which is called Pakikipagkapwa Damdamin, a long word, but literally translated in English, Feeling With. And that book was accompanying survivors of disasters, wherein we formed a team, and the team had the conviction that every person, young and old, rich and poor, have resources that we can surface and affirm in times of crisis, and doing this in the most respectful way, preserving their dignity. So that's what we did. And when I left that, I wrote, and when I left that, I had to write a book. So I am now that, Chris, thank you so much for making me do this journey, because now I'm realizing that when I leave an enterprise or something, I write a book. Okay, I'll explain that later.
I can see that you do that. That's absolutely right.
I didn't know that.
And my only fear is, honey, that you've written 13 books and we've only got to book 3. So what I'm really keen for you to do before we get you to the end of your 15 minutes, which is coming along.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the next social issue, I better go fast. The next social issue is the OFW, Overseas Filipino Workers phenomenon. It was such a big thing in the country because parents had to leave their families to work abroad to survive, bring money to the Philippines, but it was not for the families alone, it was for our economy. Without the remittances of the overseas Filipino workers, which are everywhere in the world now, in all corners of the world, our economy would collapse. So it was a very, very big social issue. So I did an intensive study of cases, and then intervention with the team. And then when I ended it, I wrote another book for Nawala ang Ilaw ng Tahanan, summarizing everything, which means the light of the home is gone. That was the translation of a Time magazine correspondent, who interviewed me about it because it's a very important phenomenon, the economy of a country crashing without these people. And they were called heroes, but nobody really took care of them. So we did all this work for them, helping the families left behind and all that sort of thing. Okay, so I left that to the book. So comes another issue of street children all roaming all over the place. So UNICEF again and the Australian Aid came to me and said, can we do something about street children? So of course we did some research, and we did with the profiling of street children, 3 kinds of street children, sexually abused, substance abusing, and children in conflict with the law. So we profiled them, made the dynamics very clear, how different one is from the other, and how the different interventions have to be done, sometimes opposite. So this was a book that was used all over the country by the social workers dealing with street children. So that's how I ended. That's how I left that, with a book. Okay. So after that, there was another issue, family violence. So we did a lot of work with the poor communities where there was a lot of violence as a pilot project. And we did not just research, but we did actual intervention with them, a team again, and where we did modules on how to prevent violence, what were the resilient factors, what are the protective and abuse factors, and so on. And I wrote a book called The Path to Healing, a primer in preventing family violence. So I left that. Okay, and then the street children, before I left that, by the way, I wrote a book again by UNICEF again, and the title was Listen to Their Inner Voice, Street Children Speak with Their Drawings and Metaphors. A very, very interesting book I'd like to share with you. But anyway, so I ended up with a book. So, okay, always now I realize, as Chris, because of you asking me to do this, as I journey towards one enterprise to another, I write a book. And I think it's my way of documenting, my way of leaving a legacy, my way of making people know how to do things that or sharing what I did, and also my way of having some kinds of closure that I could move on to the next enterprise.
Which is a great learning. Which is sorry, Hani, that's a great learning by itself, is it not? To be able to document and provide information for others to use. Absolutely.
Right, and it's been used all over the Philippines. The books have been used
Honey,
all over the Philippines.
Honey, I wonder if I could interrupt you.
Yes, please.
Just to ask you whether you'd be kind enough to come up to date now and just tell us a little bit about what your reflections are now that you are where you are right now in your life.
Yes, okay, that's where I'm going. Thanks.
That would be really good.
Yes, last book on 2009, before I go to the now, where I'm transitioning. I'm trying to do this very fast.
Don't worry, because it's each of these items that you have been describing to us are so important. You know, these achievements are so important. So it's not a question of wanting to rush you. It is a question of wanting to know where you are now. That's all.
Okay, so now after that, there's the play therapy. We were using play therapy for many traumatized children and even adults, executives. Play therapy was very effective. But when I traveled around the world, Boston, Canada, Japan, they had play therapy associations. We didn't have any. So I formed in 2009 the Philippine Association for Child and Play Therapy, nicknamed PhilPlay, which is thriving now after 1 year. And after that, I formed the team, and we wrote the book again called The Magic of Play, which is like a manual of how to do play therapy and with actual cases. So that's how I ended it. So I think that's like, now I realize when I close something or go to another enterprise, I write a book. That is my transitioning. Maybe that is also my succession way of doing succession, which is very different. And also my way of making, putting the knowledge into a bigger world, no? And so on. So now I'm already here in MLAC, where we're doing a lot of work with families. I'm transitioning. And what do I want to do when I transition, after I leave this handling of this in the capable hands of Hannah Murillo? I want to live a kinder, slower life in my nature sanctuary. I want to go back to my piano playing. I want to go back to my harp playing. I want to go back to my bamboo flute playing and composing. And I also want to do more paintings, which I've been doing, which I have not done for a long time. I've not had time to do. And welcome visitors, friends, colleagues, people who need help here in our sanctuary, where they want to converse, listen, talk, hear, consult, drink cocktails, whatever, and really connect with people in the community who love to come here in our nature sanctuary because it's open. And even in the COVID time, we never wore masks, but nobody got COVID because it's open air, vast. The sky is very blue and clear and a lot of trees. It's like a forest. So that's what I want to do. I want to do more of the joyful, mindful, artful life. That's what I want to do first.
How wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, no, it's been incredible to hear about your journey. And we've only just, and as people can tell, we've only just touched the surface. And of course, you hadn't, it's no wonder that you are so revered in your own country, and particularly by the psychological community, but by many others as well. So, Hani, thank you for doing that. And what we understand is that by the time that you have got to your particular status in life, you are planning on following the arts, music, art, nature, and of course mindfulness, and that's your plan for the future. Am I right?
Yes, right. And conversations with people or consulting about their problems, coming
Yeah,
here and
yeah.
giving talks once in a
And,
while.
right.
And
And having, as
that's
I understand it, having the
webinars.
odd cocktail also.
Oh
That's what,
yes, cocktail every day.
yeah,
That's a necessity.
good.
That's what we do every day with my husband here.
All
And
right.
we have
Nani,
guests, all kinds of people. Yes.
Nani, thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you.
We are now going to invite Nani Zulminarni to give us her talk. Nani, you're most welcome. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Elderly Council, for having me in this space. I really appreciate it and super excited to engage further in the council. I started working on a grassroots women organizing in 1987 when I graduated from Bogor Agriculture Institute. It was not because I had the visions around women's rights, but because I couldn't find another job, mostly because I wear hijab. Hijab was rejected by the whole system in Indonesia during that time. So my journey started here as a field worker organizing women farmers in West Java and women fisher folk in Riau around economic empowerment in the women organization called PPSW. This is the Center for Women Resources Development. The founder was Hamsia Jamal, an Asoka fellow in Indonesia at that time. Although the beginning, I work in this issue as an accident, can you call it like that, like since I have no other choices, but slowly I learned and developed my consciousness on women's rights issues in Indonesia. And I also discovered that what I experienced before is part of the discriminations against women. Fast forward, I end up become the director of the organization. So that's my career path on these organizations after working almost 10 years, for more 10 years, then I become the directors. But in 1998, 1999, along with the social, political, and economic turbulence in Indonesia due to the multiple crises at that time, I faced personal challenges with my marriage and had to get divorced. At that time, I have 3 sons, 12 years old, 10 years old, and 6 years old. And suddenly my life changed dramatically. Aware that I might cause some issues with the organization because the organization has a big name and all this image, then I decided to resign from PPSW. My friend Kamala Chandra Kirana, she was the Secretary General of National Commission on Stop Violence Against Women, approached me at that time and asking me to document the life of widows in conflict areas of Indonesia post the political transitions. And at the same time, there's another guy in Indonesia, Scott Guggenheim. He's the head of social development in the World Bank in Indonesia, leading huge project, the biggest project in Indonesian development, asking me to manage a project called Widows Project, actually to give direct cash transfer for widows in conflict and post-conflict area. So there are a lot of dialogue both in myself and with others on this proposal because of many reasons, including the development program and the things. But as a divorced woman in Indonesia, I start feel all the challenges by myself. I have to face this discrimination, stigmatization, humiliations, exclusions, even rejection and stereotyping against me. I also have challenges in dealing with family law system in Indonesia, fighting for the right custody of my sons, for example. The battle is really very painful. In exploration to these 2 proposals, I met many rural women who are widows, divorced, abandoned, exclusion, single women who are very poor and share similar conditions and experiences with me. In some cases, even worse. And some of them really traumatized because of their experience. I also found how the whole system has been injustice to people like us, which has caused many problems like very deep poverty, exclusions that affect not only us as a persons, as a women, but also our children and family. So to realize this, I then decide to to take the two proposal and then create my own paradigm, create my own organizations called PACA, the Empowerment of Women-Headed Family. Basically try to organize, work with, and building collective power of widows, divorced, abandoned, single women in rural areas of Indonesia. My dream is first to change the narrative from janda. Janda is Indonesian word for address to widows and divorce. We don't differentiate in Indonesian language. So to change this paradigm, because janda, the word janda, very stigmatized in Indonesia. To PACA, PACA means women-headed family, perempuan kepala keluarga. So this is the change the narrative. That's the first one. Second is really to make ourselves visible in the whole system, because we are excluded since Indonesian law says the head of the family are men. So even though we don't have husband, then we have to attach to certain family. So the whole system, including social, political, and economic, even culture, actually exclude us from this. So we want to make ourselves visible. One of indicator is really recognitions in the data system and in the legal framework. The third is really to organize collective actions of all women who share similar experience to make changes in our own lives, including access and control over resources, education, technology and information, and engage in the whole system. And the fourth is really to build collective power to make influence and systemic change, particularly related with family matters and its legal framework. So we do a lot of activities, organizing, and from several villages, now we reach over more than 1,600 villages in all over Indonesia, building the women's movements. So after 20 years building this movement of women-headed family in Indonesia, in 2020, I have to pass the executive leadership to new set of leaders in PACA as I enter pension age in Indonesia, 58 years old. Actually, I have been preparing for this for quite some time, after 10 years of PACA actually. But I have to admit it is not easy. Therefore, it takes almost another 10 years to finally happen. PACA is not a job for me, it's my life. I create PACA as part of my personal struggle. It is professional, emotional, and spiritual journey of 1/3 of my life. As a social entrepreneurs and change makers, even at my older age, I have more ideas and motivation to make changes. As my children already find their own life, having family, I even now have more time, energy, connections, and motivation to work. It's very painful to let go the baby that I started and become big, have influence. So in order to overcome this potential post-power syndrome after leading PACA for 20 years, I established several ways in my decisions. First, I start focusing myself on celebrating and embracing my great feelings of what have been achieved in the past 20 years of my journey, rather than thinking of what will happen with this organization. I celebrate first the existence of strong and accountable organization of PACA in the ecosystem of women's rights movement in Indonesia. And second is really I celebrate the visibility of the narrative of women-headed family or PACA at all levels. So now government in their policy always mention PACA. We even have special policy for women-headed family, and government adopt the PACA word in that. And so as in social cultural, the women-headed family, the terminology of PACA is already accepted. And also in spiritual and faith conversations, we have movement around faith leaders in Indonesia, women, particularly women, female ulama in Indonesia, which really highlight the role of women as the head of the family. And the third, I celebrate more than 85,000 women-headed family organized and lead the movement at the grassroots level in all over Indonesia. And last but not least, I celebrate thousands of grassroots women leaders who are able to claim leadership space from household to public space. So the second strategy is really, I started a new idea. This actually started before 2020, it's 2016. I developed with my team in PACA, we developed Academy Paradikta. This is a non-formal education institution, a kind of school, non-formal school for grassroots women. We try to structuring PACA experiences in building capacities and leadership of grassroots women. We create this space for all PACA team who still want to contribute to the movement, but facing the barriers of organizational rules on these age things. And third, really transform my roles in PACA. So it's not like a giving up or really stay away, but really transform my roles in PACA by joining the board of PACA Executive Director and chairing it, and as the advisory board for the PACA Federation of National Women. So the grassroots women, the women-headed family form their own association and become federation at the national level. So I joined that as part of the movement. And the fourth is really finding new space that align with my new thinking and ideas in the movement. So I joined Ashoka as the regional director of Ashoka Southeast Asia to build Everyone Changemaker movement. So this is a new chapter of my journey, professionally, emotionally, and spiritually. So I use all my reflected experiences in building PACA movement into this new journey. I cultivate all the networks and relationships I invested in the past 20 years, even more than 33 years in the women's rights movement to reach the missions, including working closely with PACA as an organization and with the Federation of Women-Headed Family as a movement to build Everyone Changemaker movement. So here I am at 61 years old, pension from the organization I established, but continue holding the agenda and now leading a global network organization of social entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you. Here you are at a very young 61 years old. Thank you for a very beautiful presentation, which I know we all enjoyed very much indeed. You mentioned, Nani, you mentioned the whole question of, well, you had a wonderful phrase, by the way, post-power syndrome. We, those of us in the Elders Council were chatting away on admiring that phrase, which I think was a very nice phrase. And you also mentioned the personal, the professional, and the spiritual. Now, you didn't mention much about the spiritual. Would you like to comment on that at this time?
Yes, I always consider myself as a spiritual person, even though maybe people associate with my particular religion, right? But I always put, as a human being, we have our physical, our intellectual, all the things, but there are other elements that I always bring in all my thinkings, all my condition and position, and whenever I want to make decisions. So I always asking all element in myself, particularly the spirituality, because spirituality helped me, guide me to make better choice in life and to really clarify my purpose, because life is too short, right? Life is too short and there are so many issues, so many problems, so many challenges. And with, by bringing my spirituality into the conversation that I face personally and with others, then I can see things more clarity, and I think I can see the purpose of my life.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's also true that Honey brings mindfulness to her life, which is again a form of higher being.
I want to react to Nani. It's so touching. May
yes,
I?
Of course.
Yes. Well, actually, I was asked, my training has been very experimental behavioral, but in the last, now that I'm 80, I was asked to do a talk on the question of whether does spirituality have a role in psychological interventions. So I did a long talk. In the end, I said, spirituality does not just have a role, it is the core of every psychological intervention. In fact, without spirituality, you cannot do good psychotherapy, which is I've been doing for 50 years. May I say what I forgot to say?
Well, you may, but I also want to make sure that we give the friends on the call a chance to ask a question.
Yeah.
So
1 second, because I wasn't able to say the last one. The succession to me means a transition And the words are transition, sustainability, letting go, and trust. So to quote the Dalai Lama, which he said, in the end, what matters most is how well we lived, how well we loved, and how well we have learned to let go. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very glad I didn't close you off at that point.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have an opportunity for some discussion and questions from our wonderful audience, a very large audience today, which we're very pleased about. And we have a large audience because we have such wonderful speakers. It's kind of logical. And I wondered whether Andrea or Caitlin, you had spotted a question on the chat that we might want to deal with straight away, or whether we would like to hear from people. If you have a question and would like to ask it, please do the usual thing, put it up on the reactions or wave your arms around in the air. One way or the other, we are certainly going to be able to find you. There was one question that I noticed. Yes, Hani, one of the questions that came up on the chat was in relation to this question of writing a book each time you had done a particular major project, a major enterprise or project, and then you wrote a book, and the question really is, does that help you by bringing the book together, by bringing all the information together? Does that help you then to move on to the next thing? Is that one of the kind of logics behind it that you have experienced?
Yes, writing a book to me is putting everything together in a very readable form that's useful for people. And therefore, my thinking, as the question was being asked, yes, it is my way of, in a way, having a kind of a closure, feeling good in a way that I have, given a legacy, if I put it that way, and I can move on. Yes, that's a very good point, because I realized only because of your invitation, Chris, that now only do I see that when I move to another enterprise, I write a book. Maybe that's my way of letting go, my way of summarizing, my way of, succession, sustainability, and definitely letting go. Thank you for that question.
No, it's a pleasure, Nani, and thank you to the questioner. That was absolutely great.
Thank you.
Nani, the whole question of one of the things that has become obvious in your talk is that you always gave very careful thought before you went to the next step, as it were. And so, whilst I'm tempted to ask you, is there a time when you didn't think at all and just did? but perhaps more seriously for a minute, is there a time, is it true that you have always been able to plan carefully before taking the next move? Or were there times when you had to act more impulsively and more on the spur of the moment?
Yeah, I think I would say that in many decision, actually, I do not really think very deeply on that and make decision. For example, my decision to get married. It's not really carefully thought, and it's end up with broken marriage, right? But then the other, I always believe my philosophy of life is really follow the water, so going down rather than going up. So going, if I want to make decisions on some things, I really look down. I mean, reflect on whoever does not have, for example, or whoever excluded, whoever not there. So I try to reflect on whether I have the privilege and things like that. So it's more on that. Sometimes the decision is right, sometimes it's not really right. But I always know, even though it seems like it's not right, but I always know that there is always a learning on that, which I can cultivate and then become some values to my life. Then help me to then plan more, better, be careful, as you say, Chris, in the next choices. So yeah, many things I do also. I feel like I always feel like it's already, the pathways is I know if I do this, I have these consequences. So I know it's very well from, from listening stories from the women that I'm working with, from my grandparents, my mothers and my grandmothers. And I know if I take this decision, then I have to face these consequences. So I compare different consequences, then I make decision. And that's why I always be responsible for whatever happened after that.
Thank you very much indeed. Nani, I have Andrea with a question, and then I see we were just, Stefan Hosner is about to leave us, but he has sent a very, very warm and kind note in the chat, which you might want to see. Andrea, over to you.
Yeah, excuse me. The issue, of course, of trust when you're moving on comes up all the time. And when you've put so much work into what you're doing and build an organization, as you say, Nani, do you feel that your confidence in the next leadership, or whether the mission that you began will be continued? Do you feel that weighs heavily on you? Do you feel confident that the mission will carry on, and that's one of the reasons that you're worried about leaving? I wonder what your response is to that.
Yeah, I think my worries about leaving, of course, maybe just like others, right? It's 20 years. I start from zero and then building it. It's like, then some question, what should I do next? Because I've never prepared actually. What should I do, right? But yeah, there's always time, right? Everything has to be ended. And I think my colleague as well in the organization want a new leadership and the things. So, but then I see when Ashoka approached me asking whether I'm interested on that. So I find the aha moment for some question which I have during my leadership on women's rights movement. For example, my biggest question is why for a long time the women struggle. For example, Beijing Declaration, up 25 years after Beijing Declaration, there are three main issues has not been changed so far. Other change, but these three things. First, violence against women, multiple burdens of women on domestic roles, and the third, women's marginalization in economic roles. So then when Ashoka asking me, and I look at the, where is Ashoka now? As Ashoka fellow, I know Ashoka, right? But where is leading? I said, if I'm asked to taking care of, looking for social entrepreneurs, I don't want to do it because it's not my passion. I'm very much movement builder. So when they said, oh, we try to building everyone change maker movement, then this everyone change maker then stuck in my head. I said, oh, maybe this is it, no? After more than 30 years in women's rights movement, now I have to rethink more inclusively, bringing in, others, not only women, to make bigger change for women, right? So that's why in Ashoka, the core work is really on children's and family, because all these three issues actually rooted in the family, by domestic violence occurs all the time and getting worse because all started in the family, and the multiple burdens of women also start in the family, and economic marginalization also start in the family. So that's, I think, the answer for my wondering and my question. So, and I thought as spiritual person, I believe this is part of the, the journey that I have to take in order to continue. Actually, what I have been doing with PECA is not like stopping, but really continue the journey until I have to go to leave this world.
Thank you, Nani. Thank you, Andrea. We have a question which has come from Angela Arsiga, who has put a question in the chat. And the essence of the question is, what inspires you to do what you've done and to plan for doing what you do in the future? Honey, what inspires you? What inspires you?
Okay.
I'll come back to you, Nani, in a second. What inspires
Yes,
you?
yes. What inspires me, it's a question that's deeper than what I can say now. I think it starts very, very early with my parents. My father was an architect who became a civic leader, founded the first youth association in the Philippines. My mother was a person who listened, and our home was always a home for people who needed help, who needed to talk, who needed. It was just an open home, and I think it was very deep in me. Now that I'm thinking about it, after doing this journey, it's all the source, all right there when I was a child. And in my work as a clinical psychologist, family therapist, and child therapist, I can see how important it is that what is planted early, even now at 80, I'm seeing people 60, 80, 70, and even no matter how much they've changed in their lives, how many things they've encountered, how drastic their changes in their lives, there always remains at my 80. Now I will write about it because I see that what was imprinted, what has happened in the family early is still there. There is always a trace of it. And I can argue because before I did that, I debunked determinism, I debunked all those things. But now in my old age, after 50 years and more of practice and dealing with people in depth, very deep with families and children, their pain, their joy, everything. Now I see how important it is, the parenting, because MLAC, our flagship programs, parenting is nation building. And so parenting and family life, early family life, no matter what you say, has a very, very big, very, very deep imprint, even if you're already 18 and you've done the psychotherapy. That's what I can say. Family. And thank you.
Thank you, honey. I had no idea that you were older than me.
I'm the oldest here, yay.
I'm just a child compared to you. Thank you. Nani, would you like to say what inspires you? Of course, we have some idea, but if you would like to try to condense it for us, that would be lovely.
Yeah, I think it's almost similar. For me, live reality is always inspire me. When I was a little girl and growing up, is really my grandmother and my mother. But now as a grandparent, as a grandmother, of course, my grandchildren's and the intergeneration, I can see how these intergenerations and the passing on values, principle is very important. And, thinkings of we are living not taking our rights, not taking our our rights to to enjoy life, but it's really to prepare for the future for our next generation. So that's always keeping me alive and thinking of what can I contribute to to make my grandchildren, great grandchildren to live better than us in this world.
Absolutely. In a second, we're going to pass to our friend Mel, who's going to be summarizing and finishing the webinar. We have got about 6 minutes left. But I wanted just to say that we are very eager for everybody on the show today, on the webinar today, to join us. And so Caitlin has just put into the chat a membership form. You don't have to be any particular age. You can be below or above retirement age. It's not a problem. You can be 18 like Honey is, or you can be 75 like I am, and it will be all fine. So, and it's not. We're not charging you. We don't want to cost you. We just want to have your membership and be able to communicate with you. The other thing I wanted to do today was just to give a very warm welcome to our Global Advisory Board members, many of whom are on the call today, and we are so pleased that you are with us. Thank you very much indeed. Mel, are you ready for us to hand over to you?
I am indeed, Chris. Thank you very much. It falls on me, normally my role at the end of webinars to sum up and try and pick on one or two facts that have come up from the discussion. So first of all, I'd like to say huge thank you to Honey and Nani for sharing their experiences, their journey. The title of the webinar was My Journey Celebrated, and I certainly think both of them should celebrate their journeys because, well, they're packed with wonderful stories, wonderful interventions, wonderful outcomes, and you know, like so many social entrepreneurs or people in the space, completely driven by good values of passion and care, and the outcomes during these journeys have been really quite substantial and will last for a long time. You know, Honey said, well, I'll give you 52 years in 15 minutes. Well, we all know that that's impossible. Well, Honey had a good attempt, but in those 15 minutes was so rich, and I don't know how many books came out of that 15 minutes. But one of the key learnings I think that we took from that actually was that what Honey was saying about when she was moving on to a different part of her life and journey, that the book kind of acted as a kind of legacy, a form of closure. But not only that, but it was a kind of part of succession planning. So it wasn't just a form of closure and moving on, but part of succession and sharing through the book, through part of her journey, then moving on to the next part. And then almost coming back, if you like, full circle, and wanting to go back to music, piano, harp, and painting and sharing with nature. And I think there's always been a challenge in all of our webinars with this word retirement, and we don't like that because we don't want to stop, because we're driven by other factors to make the world a better place. But I think that kind of summation of kind of going back and appreciating the world which we live in as we get a bit older is actually really, really important. And then Nani shared with us her journey, and I love the kind of honesty in terms of not so many people kind of start off by saying, well, I just fell into this. I didn't know what I was doing here, and then learning, became a director of the organization, in difficulties in their own personal life with a divorce, and then kind of almost because of the laws of the country kind of shunned, but built movements around it. And I just thought that, you know, that again, that point which we've talked about a lot, when Nani got to the point of retirement, 58 years in Indonesia, it's painful to let go. And so many of us have experienced that pain. And so the real pearls of wisdom that came from Nani then were about how one dealt with that, how she dealt with it, and how we all could deal with that. And that was about, first of all, celebrating what's been achieved in the past. And so that's something we could all learn about, because sometimes we're so driven by the outcomes in a difficult world, we forget actually what we've actually achieved, and we should celebrate that. And Nani certainly has a very good case for that, and she explained what's happened with that. And then secondly, she talked about how, right, okay, after you celebrate that, as well as that, coming up with new ideas, and then transforming a role to become a different player on the board. She had to leave, she came on the board, and then finding new spaces, which is in her case was joining Ashoka. So these were great pearls of wisdom, I thought, from Nani, and added together with Honey's contribution. Just show you the impact. I hate to kind of measure it because it will be through the roof in terms of what both have contributed to wider society, and these pearls of wisdom, which we're going to try and capture within the elders and share with others, are fantastic. So we're very, very grateful indeed for your contributions. Thank you so much. It's fascinating listening to you. I can't believe an hour has gone already, because I could have listened to you both for hours and hours. And maybe if I could just finish, it was with the Dalai Lama quote, which I probably haven't captured quite right, but it's, you know, we as we get to the end of life, it's about how we've lived our life well, how we've loved, and how we learned how to let go. And I think that was a very relevant to us as elders. And so thank you very much again to everybody for joining. And thank you very much in particular to Honey and Nani for sharing their journeys.
Thank you.
Loved hearing them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, honey. Congratulations for your
Thank you,
books.
Nani. Thank you,
Thank you,
Nani.
Chris,
Nani.
Andrea.
Thank you.
everybody.
Agnes.
Wonderful people.
It's been a great pleasure. Been a great pleasure. A wonderful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm so inspired po. I am only 46 years old, and I'm in a group of elders full of inspiration. People of my age, they seem to be tired. Now leave this Zoom meet with full of inspiration. Dr. Carandang, Dr. Hani, thank you so much po. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
And
Angela.
Ma'am Nani, thank you so much. God bless you all.